Good morning. This is Karen Udis, and I'm calling this video, "Oh, What a Beautiful Morning." And the reason I thought that was good is it's one of my favorite songs, and it's upbeat, but also we're in a new beginning. We're in a different reality. Not everybody understands this, but pretty soon it's going to be very apparent. And the transition is kind of what's the best way to describe it? It's strange. This coronavirus is not making very much sense to people. Nobody's really getting sick. There are a few people. It's a real illness, but it's not an epidemic of the proportions that would call for this kind of a response. It's getting people very uncomfortable. And the reason why is they're trying to unsettle people. They're trying to frighten them. And the who's they? Well, most people are taking the news from the mainstream media. And what is the mainstream media? That's owned by the culprits that we're fighting. And some people know a lot about this fight because I've been telling people about it for the longest time, and other people have been noticing. And we're putting all of this together. But let's focus right now on what is the coronavirus and what does this mean. It's a real illness, but it's an illness that was developed with a patent. And somebody's saying, well, there are other strains of this virus, coronavirus. It's kind of common. But I was reading a very interesting book about what happened during the potato famine, and where you had many people dying of typhus. And that was a huge illness that was being transmitted through an epidemic. But we don't have an epidemic here. And why should all the schools be closed? It's not making very much sense. And when people stop and think about it, and what is the response? Well, all the businesses are closing, the schools are closing, and the politicians are telling people that they've got to protect themselves. They've got to do something to stop the virus. And some of my relatives are worried about me because I'm kind of an old lady, and they think that I'm vulnerable and I shouldn't be exposed. Well, I don't want to be stressed out, and so I'm not confronting people, but there are enough of us that know that this is something called a false flag. What is a false flag? That's a government that's misinforming its people and telling them that there's an active war going on by another country, and that other country is actually not doing anything to foment a war. But this coronavirus, this is in all different proportions like a huge war. And the idea, what the people that are behind this are trying to do is they're trying to panic everybody. And people notice that the stock markets are really not very stable. And nothing is really very stable anymore. Nothing is the way you expect. And people that want to gather for important things, important events, like weddings and funerals, they're not doing this. And anybody that wants to be in contact with other people, they're trying to do this virtually with Skype or something else. One of the medical practices that I go to, the doctor is trying to consult the patients by video, by conference. You know that that's not really going to help because you need to take samples of blood and other things. You need to do actual tests. And there are hospitals, I think, that are caring for some patients on an emergency basis, but the nurses are in skeleton staff. I have a daughter who's a social worker, and she's working with her job is actually as a social worker is to do whatever will help to keep people out of hospitals when they're not really very adept at the things that they need to do. My daughter will step in, and she's working for an agency. Well, the teams that are caring for these people, they're doing it virtually. They're having conference calls. This is not really the way to handle patients, is it? And people are really very, they're nervous about this. It's very unusual for all the schools to be closed. But one of the benefits from this, I was talking to various people, is they're not scrambling to keep up with schedules anymore. That was actually something that I learned when I was close to death in a hospital, which is what happened to me after I was poisoned with arsenic. What you do is you learn from unusual events. And so what I learned was I don't have to keep up with a schedule. I'm off the beaten path. And one of the other things that I learned in this was that people are very kind. When I was wheelchair bound, it was a different universe. If I went to the store in a wheelchair, then people were doing everything possible to make it easy for me. They were caring for me, and that's actually what we're like. It shouldn't come as a surprise, because people with their families, there may be troubled relationships, but they tend to love one another. That's our normal way of being. We do care for each other. We are naturally kind. And when you read stories in the papers and you hear about all of these horrible things going on and all of the horrible things in wars, and this is mostly stories that are trying to convince people that human nature is very different from what it actually is. So if you see the outline that I've submitted to you, I've given you some background information. I'm talking about what we have to do to know ourselves, because we think that other people are different from us, but we're actually pretty similar in a lot of respects. And one of the great similarities is the fact that we have souls. Some people don't focus on this, but that's an actual fact. That is a fact. And we all do care about each other. And some of us, we all have the same kind of hard wiring, but some of us, well, I don't want to say are more evolved, but some of us use our brains in different ways. And the ones that use something called a prefrontal cortex. That's the part of the brain that looks at how the other parts of the brain are functioning. That's also the part of the brain where empathy comes from. That's one of the things that make human beings different from other animals, because we do have empathy. These are very important characteristics. So let's go back and look at the coronavirus and why I say it's a scam. It's a scam because actually I'm in touch with a lot of people who want me to know that there's a false flag event going on. And what's the end thing that the Banking Cartel, which they're the folks that are behind a lot of this, what is it they want? They want to frighten people so much that people are going to want to get a vaccine, and that vaccine is going to be an RFID chip. That's a radio frequency identification device. They want to keep tabs on us. And some people realize that we're being watched all the time. There are cameras up all the time. There is face recognition technology that's being trained against us. A lot of people understand that we're not living in what would pass as a normal society, and we're being separated from each other, and we're being made suspicious and uncomfortable through the mainstream media, but also through the alternative media. One of the pieces of information that I've sent you, because I did a background piece with the information that was sent to me, I did a background piece, and that person was reminding you that the mainstream media is owned by the same group that owns Wall Street and owns the central banks. And the number of owners of the media is very small. These central bankers are all owned by what's called the Black Nobility. There are a few families. It's all very concentrated. And enough of us have realized this corrupt arrangement. One of the things that I'm doing is I'm working at the very center of this corruption, because I was at the World Bank in their legal department for over 20 years. And I discovered when I was there that things were not the way they were supposed to be, and that was corrupt. And so what I've been putting out in information is I've been documenting what I was telling everybody at the time that I discovered how corrupt things were and who I was trying to alert. And so what you will see in the information that I've been giving you is what I did with that information that was really very strange. I didn't just say, oh, well, it's strange, and leave it at that. My job in the World Bank legal department was to keep things on track. And what I mean when I say on track is that there had to be information that flowed to the people that were responsible for running the place. And because I'm a lawyer, and I don't want to go into what lawyers actually do, because many of them, most of them, have been co-opted. They're working for this tightly knit group of families that own all of the central banks. And the central banks are the ones that make money, paper money, fake money. It's fake money. Paper money is not real money. And that's the way the corruption starts. Because if you can print money and then buy real things with it, there's no way that anyone is going to be able to stand up to anyone. Well, guess what? There is a way that everyone can stand up to this kind of corruption. First of all, you have to recognize that things are not normal. And that's the best part about this coronavirus. People are using their critical reasoning capabilities to see that nothing's adding up. It's not making sense. And there are some people who have been keeping track of all of these things that don't make sense for some time. And